to all of you. Please, welcome.
Thank you very much, and welcome to this seminar organized by SILC Förlag over there. My name is Hedwig Kastenholm, and I work for SILC Förlag, and we have published 2 books about Cuba. And today we have 2 of our authors here. We have Che Guevara, author of I skuggan av en myt, that was published in Swedish now for this book fair, earlier in English. He is the nephew of Che Guevara. Then he moved to Cuba as a child with his parents because of political persecution in Argentina. And we also have with us Erik Jennische, author of a book called Måste få polisen ur huvudet, that we published in 2013. And he has spent time in Cuba as an academic researching, and he's also the head of the Latin America department at Civil Rights Defenders. So the theme of the book fair this year, and also for this seminar, is freedom of speech. And as we all know, there's not freedom of speech in all of the world, and especially not in Cuba. There has not been freedom of speech for 60 years. And today we want to talk about what happens to a country and the people in that country when there is no freedom of speech. So I want to ask you, Martin, you came to Cuba as a child when you were 10. Did you immediately realize that there was no freedom of speech, that there were things you could not say and do? Or did you feel it right away? And how did that feel for you as a young child?
Yes, first of all, thank you very much. Tack så mycket is the only word that I say, I know say in Swedish. When we moved from Argentina to Cuba because my family was exiled from the dictatorship in Argentina, I was 10 years old, and I never heard talk before about my uncle, Che Guevara, because it was very dangerous in Argentina, speak about communism and that stuff. And when I arrived to Cuba, they were waiting for us in different cars, and they take us to bring us to the Habana Libre Hotel, to the Habana Hilton. And in the first day, they tell us that because the reason that we have an uncle that he died for everybody have freedom and all that stuff, we will be a VIP persons. We will live very different than the population, the common people in Cuba. And from the first day, I realized that always was a lie. Everybody was lying us. The communism was not for everybody the same thing. The family of the high-class revolutionaries, comandantes, we live in better conditions, pretty better conditions than the population. The answer is very difficult to explain because in Cuba have the same government from more than half year. In 50 years were different etapas. No? In the first, the people have a very hard fear to speak against because the punishment were very harsh. 20 years in prisoner, or send people to Siberia, or send to Angola, or to Mozambique. Now it's apparently more soft, but as well they have a very hard punishment.
So, Erik, you were there, you spent your time in Cuba later. How did you experience that coming from Sweden, where obviously we have freedom of speech, and how did you feel when you arrived to Cuba?
I believe the first thing you notice arriving in Cuba and trying to make people speak about politics this was the first time I was there was in the late 90s, was how very afraid people were of expressing their opinions, and also how that fear had made them incapable of actually pronouncing these opinions they had. It was very difficult for them to actually create opinions, and maybe that is the first consequence that a system which oppresses the freedom of speech has on its population. it makes the people afraid, and it makes them incapable of pronouncing their opinions. And then there are several other consequences that the fear brings, and that is that of course that people get very afraid of improvising in society and improvising on doing things because they're afraid of doing or saying the wrong thing. It could be a simple thing as a school teacher that wants to have a special discussion on the international criticism against Cuba on human rights. Okay, so everybody knows there is an international criticism on Cuba on human rights, so then maybe a teacher would like to have a discussion about that in his classroom or her classroom. But that would never happen, because the teacher would know that we cannot talk about this. We're not allowed to criticize the system or talk about these difficult things. So then the people don't get to know, the students don't get to know what human rights means.
So you mean that it's partly that there is no guaranteed freedom of speech, but then that becomes that people cannot speak because they don't have the practice and the opinions, etc. How does that show when you speak to people as an academic and when you were doing your research in Cuba?
Well, the first consequence is that there is no good social science to get in Cuba to read or to study. Everything that is important about Cuba has been produced by either foreigners or Cubans in exile that has been writing their things from abroad. In social sciences, it's basically impossible to produce anything of real value inside the island and make that. It could be produced, maybe written by somebody, but not disseminated among the people or discussed in the media.
It's kind of hard to imagine how the system permeates everything. Martin, in your book, you write about the neighborhood committees of the Communist Party, and you say they turned into organisms for professional gossip that they then passed to the state. How does that work? Do everyone in the neighborhood participate? And the people that don't want to participate, what do they do?
That is a very interesting question. The committees were formed in the principle, in the beginnings of the revolution. The leitmotif of the committees was to fight against the enemy. But it turns very faster in a gossip, you know. And almost everybody participate. But there is another side of the same coin. People criticize the same thing that they do in the morning. In the night they say, wow, I hate that. And it's a very, the communist system have a particularly very interesting and very hard to explain. They put into the brain of the people the autocensura, how to say in English? Self-censor. And people are very, more than fear, they have shame to share their opinions, and fear and shame. Because in every square there are committee, and maybe your best friend or your brother even can go to the police to say, my brother is in contact with the United States. That's in the, for example, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s was very hard. If you put a blue jean like that, they say that ideology, you are dirty. You have the brain lost, you know. If you, we, for example, the way to be against that oppression was listening rock and roll, because rock and roll was a music from the enemy, but as well was a ludic, was a music with a lot of lyrics, not about revolution, about the town, and because came from United States and from England, and that was very, very bad in the city area, in the committee. They hear you listening the Rolling Stones, for example, that they publish now, or Led Zeppelin, and they put a note and send to the police that in that house people are listening Rolling Stones. Now, in the 90s, and now it's in another way. It's not the same way. It changed because half century is a lot of time. But I think that it's very important to study why in the communism systems people choose to jump the wall in Berlin to escape, to instead they unify the strengths and fight again. And USSR, they chose to get away, and in Cuba to go to the sea 90 miles, 180 kilometers, swimming or in a boat to go to United States.
But there are people that stay and oppose the system. And you write in your book, Erik, about the opposition, the open opposition that dare to do that, that after they become open critical about the state, that they feel freer. How can that be?
I believe when these people, when they kind of come out of the closet as dissidents or as opponents to the system, what actually happens is that they start saying the truth that they have been hiding for many, many years, but suddenly they start saying the truth and say what they believe in. And what then happens is that meet other people that do the same thing. So these people say the truth and you say the truth yourself, and what happens is that you create trust. Because people are, you know that the people around you are saying the truth as well. And that trust in other people, that is the fundament, to me, I think, and to very many people, that is the fundament for good relationships. That is the fundamental for you feeling safe and seen and appreciated in society, because you know that your peers are saying the truth and that you are saying the truth to them. And that makes people happy. And that was very clear to me that these dissidents that I interviewed in the book, they were happier and they were more open and they were more interested in what I had to say about Sweden or whatever. So that was very, very clear. While these other people that I met on parties and on the streets or at the university, they were a lot shyer and a lot more closed, and it was really difficult for them to, or for many of them at least, to create these strong relationships with foreigners. It was difficult. So I think this trust that freedom of speech creates, that is a fundament for happiness.
Wow.
Hedwig, may I put an example? Yes, yes. For example, when I was a student in the secondary school, with the facts of Poland and Lech Walesa, no? And in 1980, in 1979, in 1982, I had a teacher, a professor of philosophy, Marxista-Leninista, Marxism-Leninism, and we discussed all the time if Lech Walesa and his strike of 1 million persons was revolutionary into a communist country. I say yes. And Cuba, the government said that Lech Walesa was an activist of the CIA, like USSR said, no? And my professor and me, we wrote very humble newspaper in the school, and 20 newspaper, and give different people, but very innocent, very naive, no deep criticism, only to saying we have a doubt if Lech Walesa is of the CIA or no, maybe not. Maybe he have a part of reason, a piece of reason. And 1 week later, I never heard again, never in my life about this teacher. The director, nobody tell me nothing. He moves to another provinces. In Cuba, you know, it's impossible. You move to another province or to another country.
I think you have to explain. Why is it impossible to move to another province of Cuba?
It's impossible because you cannot, for example, people from Camagüey, from Oriente, different provinces of Cuba, to go to Havana, they can go, stay 1 week, 2 weeks, 15 days, and have to go back to their provinces because it's not allowed to stay in Havana, to change the address, is not allowed. It's not only the fact that it's not allowed to traveling to here, to traveling abroad. It's not allowed to stay in Havana. And there's a lot of people from the farmers, from the another provinces that are living in Havana, but illegally, but not in a legal situation. I don't know why. It's a craziness of the state.
So even the small criticism will raise problems for you. But you write in your book, Erik, about the musician Gorky Aguila, and his texts are quite critical. He calls for revolts and calls Raúl Castro a fraud. How do you think he does that, and why doesn't other musicians do that as well?
Gorky Aguila is a very radical punk rocker since 20 years, or very radical, at least in his texts. His band is called Porno para Ricardo, which means porn for Ricardo. And that is, of course, an attitude of his that is very provocative to big parts of the Cuban elite. But it's interesting what you were saying about rock and roll. He's he's been a famous underground musician in Cuba since the late 90s. But he can nowadays never play anywhere. He cannot play at any concert halls. He cannot play. He's not played in the radio. He cannot rent a place. He's not invited to any festivals or anything like that. And that is because all parts of the cultural industry in Cuba is under the cultural ministry. So the cultural ministry decides on everything, and they have the economical powers, and they own the concert venues and so on. So they can say this guy cannot play, and they don't even need to have a law or persecute him or anything. They just don't open the doors to him. And they know that if somebody would invite them to play at somebody's home, for example, that could happen in a garden or something, the police could easily go in and raid the place and take the equipment away. So they are played abroad, but never inside the country. And when Rolling Stones, as you were saying before, that were prohibited in the country for many, many decades, when they played in Cuba last year, or was it earlier this year, there was a big campaign about that Rolling Stones should name this Gorky Aguila as a friend and colleague of theirs. Yep. But they didn't dare to. Not even Rolling Stones, the richest guys in the world, dared to say this guy needs to have the freedom to play his music. And that fear that even goes into the head of Mick Jagger. And that is it's a shame, of course.
Yeah, when I was reading your book, Martin, I was very surprised about that you were marked in your school records as ideologically deviant for listening to foreign music, and I thought that was very interesting as well. Well, our time is beginning to end here, and I want to say that both Martin and Erik will be over there in 6 Monter signing their books, and also Martin will be at the small stage at 1 o'clock, where we will talk more about the family history and how they came to Cuba. Klockan 1 på lilla scenen, och det samtalet kommer hållas på spanska och översättas till svenska, så inte på engelska. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.